podcast. It is June the 22nd. I'm delighted to have with us today Mehmet Ogutu, Group CEO, Global Resources Partnership and Chairman of the London Energy Club, Noor Azleen Ahmed, Editor of Crude Oil at Argus Media, and Rafiq Letta, Senior Correspondent at Energy Intelligence. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. We have that question up that we put to our audience this week, which is this sort of tight range that we've been in really for the last few weeks. And is that really being hemmed in by OPEC on one side, obviously the floor, and China the other? And 73% of our audience agreed, and we had people on the show this week who seem to think we're going to continue trading in this tight range for various reasons. Noor, let me go to you first on that. And would you agree that we're not going to really see prices stray from that range in the second half? And if so, why not, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at this point, the Argus Consulting team does expect that it will be in that range. It'll be closer towards $80. I think we're expecting that it's going to be about $80 in the third quarter for ICE Brent, and not moving that much higher. So I think that the main thing is that if prices do fall below $70, our view is that OPEC Plus may act again. So I think that will actually put a floor on the market. But you've got the uncertainty about China demand, although we do think that the demand should be increasing in the second half of 2023. So I think that's roughly, we're seeing it closer to the $80, but not above, not that much higher than that.
And what makes you think that Chinese demand will increase more in the third quarter?
Well, I think, yes.
It's had half a year now of relatively good demand, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, okay, the thing is that we've always had a very conservative view of where the Chinese demand is. The Argus Consulting team actually pegs Chinese demand growth in 2023 at 700,000 barrels per day. And I think that we are on the lower end if you look at some of the other forecasters or other consultants. But the expectations is that the growth will be coming more in the second half, just because industrial activity. And also, I think that to some extent, the Beijing seems to be quite keen to actually, the Chinese companies expect that the government may have some stimulus measures more should the economy really falters, and that they expect should help. So I think that's a key thing that we see that will actually help the China demand, and it'll be better in the second half of the year compared to the first half of the year.
Okay, and that's obviously, that stimulus will help domestic demand, presumably. Yeah. But Rafiq, let's go to you on the other part of China's economy, which is manufacturing, exports, and how that relies, obviously, to a great extent on how other economies are doing. And what's the present sentiment, do you think, on Western economy demand going forward, the pull on those Chinese products, obviously, as well, and the whole Fed policy trickling through actually from now on rather than so far, in terms of how that's being felt in oil demand expectations?
Oh, it looks pretty bearish, to be honest, for reasons that I'm not totally behind. I mean, it does look, if you look at pretty much what everyone says, demand's set to go up. We're seeing some pretty decent numbers for imports. Okay, there's a time lag there, but last month of May was 12.1 million barrels a day. That's quite steamy. I'm not seeing any massive tail off. It seems like those projections of relatively firm demand growth for H2 in China seem up, but you look at kind of the buzz, and it's not great. Sentiment's down, FDI's down compared to last year, quite considerably. Clearly, for an export-dependent economy like China, what happens in the rest of the world is of crucial importance, and there, we don't seem to be having a massive change in Fed rate policy. It looks like this drive to bring down inflation will continue, and as such, that's probably going to curb oil demand growth. So basically conflicting signals. I think there's. I think some of the data, it was mentioned in your podcast yesterday, around both supply and demand is very fuzzy at the moment, very murky, and it's really hard to get clear signals. And I think that's a bit where we are,
Okay, all right, so balanced at the moment. But Mehmet, welcome again. What demand is one thing, and we've just addressed that point a little bit, but supply is the other big one, obviously, of the equation. And the comments we had yesterday and we've had all week really is that the world has plenty of supply at the moment, no shortage. Russia is continuing to flow in terms of into the East, into India, into China, higher figures being reported by the month. And of course, despite these OPEC cuts that we've seen, we still have enough supply for the time being. Give us your take on that, and also an update, if you can, on the other peripheral suppliers that have been limited so far, such as Iraq, oil coming out of Kurdistan, etc., even Iranian oil, whether you see that making any difference in the second half.
Yes, well, I think, first of all, on Chinese oil demand, I could say a few words. China is bound to increase the demand, because if the economy is not performing well, because China needs huge amounts of new employment, because for the Chinese leadership, stability is the key, and population is increasing, one-child policy already abandoned. So there is a need to push further. So there will be more stimulus packages coming. And I believe that towards the end of the year, perhaps summer might be somehow like this, more stable, but towards the end of the year, Chinese oil demand will go up. Of course, there are trade frictions, geopolitical tensions, investment decline, as indicated, FDI going down. These are factors. However, I think China has the power domestically as well to push forward this economy. And so there will be increasing demand there. And anywhere where the price will be falling down, OPEC Plus will step in again without any regard to their decisions to meet, once in a while. But now I think if there is a demand falling and supply increasing, of course, they have to take some adjustment measures. In terms of supply, yes, there's abundance of oil, as you said, especially the Russian oil coming at discounted price, heavily discounted price. Now India buys record amounts of oil, or almost 2 million barrels per day out of their, 80% of oil in India comes from imports. And they cut back some of the Saudi and Iraqi oil. So this is I think a signal that we have to mention here is that trade diversion is taking place significantly. So the traditional suppliers somehow change now, and Russian oil making inroads in Asia Pacific in times that we haven't seen before, at the expense of some of the Gulf producers. So coming back to your question about the Iraqi Kurdish oil, as you know, almost 3 months passed since the Turkey halted the shipments coming from KRG and also Kirkuk field of Iraq. So this was about 400,000 barrels per day for Erbil, and they lost about $2 billion in this 3 months, plus 77,000 barrels coming from Kirkuk. So this is not a significant amount, of course, for world oil markets, $100 billion. So what is this for almost 500,000? But still, it is very significant for KRG region. I believe that there is going to be an agreement. This has been delayed on 2 accounts. One is that Turkey was fined, as you know, by the International Chamber of Arbitration Court in Paris, $1.5 billion. And then a second one is on the way for the period covering 2018-2023, another 2 billion. I think Turkey has the right to recourse to KRG for payment of this and then negotiate it with Iraq. If they pull it back, their complaint against Turkey, perhaps this might be the precondition for resuming Turkey, allowing the resumption of the oil shipments from KRG and Kirkuk. So I believe that the high-level discussions are taking place. Yesterday, Barzani was in Turkey being received by President Erdogan, and a Turkish team was in Baghdad and Erbil, technical discussions. So I believe that in a matter of weeks, perhaps even earlier, a political decision will be taken on this matter, but resolving also all these problems. If Iraq doesn't give in about abandoning its complaint against Turkey in Paris, I don't think that is going to be possible. So this is give and take.
Okay, thanks. And Erdogan is now back on the stage doing his thing. And I want to come back to you and talk about the Turkish economy a bit later. Noor Azlin, we just take up that point that Mehmet made, which is about Gulf crude getting displaced by Russian crude. What we're hearing is that it's not being displaced. It's just that China's taking in more crude and choosing to take that from Russia. But the Gulf volumes are secure, if you like, in terms of traditional volumes that would be taken. Would you agree with that?
Okay, there to some extent. Okay, let's just before we go to China, okay, let's just look at India. India's volumes of Russian crude have increased, as Mehmet said. It's about 2 million barrels per day total Russian crude, and I think that currently makes up about 40% of India's total crude imports. And okay, where before in 2021 it was almost nothing. It was very small. So yes. And you've got next, so Russia is still India's now largest supplier for crude. And behind it, second is Iraq. But Iraq is pretty far. It's barely 1 million barrels per day. It's roughly about 900,000 barrels per day. So Iraq volumes, which is the second largest supplier into India, is half of what Russia is supplying, right? And you move to China. So right now, Russia and Saudi Arabia seems to be always competing to be the top supplier into China. I think in May, if I'm not wrong, Russia was supplying about 2.3 million barrels per day of crude into China, and Saudi Arabia was second at about 1.72 million barrels per day, roughly around that. And then below that, you've got UAE and Iraq at roughly about 1 million to 1 million, slightly above 1 million. So I would say the term volumes that the Middle East suppliers are moving into China and to India at the moment are okay. It's so secure. It is the spot volumes that Russia is taking over. And for these two major consumers, Russia is at the moment the top supplier. So to some extent, it has taken a little bit of market share.
Yeah, and I suppose that all
could
depends.
I just say one word about here? As you know, the Moody will be in Washington today.
He is already,
Yes, already he is there, and they are going to discuss a number of important issues like nuclear issues, arms, and Russia business. But I think oil business will also come into picture there. U.S. would like to have a greater share of oil exports to India. So that's one of the other factors that we should perhaps mention, because the discussions will be going on broader geostrategic and economic issues, but oil will also be one of the hot topics to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Rafiq, well, let me go to you with that in terms of US production. I know it's not your specialty, but in terms of the indications for US oil exports into Asia, into India, into China, not as far as China, but I mean, what is the sort of sentiment there at the moment? Do you have any indicators of that? And given obviously domestic demand as well in the US?
If I can remember correctly, China in May, China was up quite a bit, back up above 500. But in general, we've seen a fall. And there's no doubt. I mean, the point I wanted to make is not so much that the Gulf players are losing big volume eastwards, although possibly in India that is the case. But really, it's been this year, the last 6 or 7 months, it's been, I think the Saudis have before May was sort of actually above Russia, certainly in terms of the official numbers. But it is the fact, and this is very important, that for the last 15, 20 years, China's provided like that massive engine of growth. Everything else could go wrong in the world of oil, but China always stood firm. And, even during COVID, China increased its imports of Gulf oil from UAE and Russia. Now it looks it's hard to see a world where Russian oil goes back the same volumes to Europe. Ergo, this redirection of flows is permanent. And that enormous kind of driver of and security of demand that the Gulf has, that's changed. That whole equation's changed, and I think that is a major change in the oil market over the last 12 months, and that has to be concerning for.
Well, okay, but all the more reason then for OPEC, Rafiq, just staying with you, to keep that price under control, right? I mean, if it lets it go above 80, let's say if we get demand coming back and prices get a natural blip, it's in OPEC's interest to keep it at 80, isn't it? To maintain that China, not taking even more discounted Russian crude, because China has kind of set a cap on what it's prepared to take crude in at, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it has gone higher, but yeah, I mean, it does seem like one can only assume that these quite big swings in China imports, last month it was 12.1, the month before it was like 10.3, are because they feel that the buyers have got, those big buyers, especially the ones of Russia, have got a lot more clout in the market, and to a certain extent, they're impacting the flat price they're buying policies in a way that hasn't happened before. As for Saudi policy, yeah, I mean, clearly price is important, but I think the main thing is control. I think for Riyadh, what has happened in the last 12 months is unacceptable in terms of outside intervention in the market. So the oil price cap, the sanctions, they're seeing all this cut price crude is weighing on the flat price and bringing this their flat price, their own exports down. It's hitting their economy. So I think OPEC's message is like, okay, sorry, our economy is not going to be the victim of your Russia policy. So I don't think the old considerations about the alliance with Washington hold anymore. And yeah, they will defend and they will want control. I'm not entirely convinced that they're per se defending any sort of price, but yeah, one would have thought around about 70 is something that would ring alarm bells. And I would think actually that they'd be looking for a bit more in the second half of the year. If they feel demand is not weakening, they'll want a bit more. But I think that, look, they're using
cuts again.
Different levers. And there's not the old kind of let's all sit down for a meeting and decide is not holding. We're seeing like these temporary cuts, voluntary cuts. We're seeing like talk about this decision to rework the quotas. I think they're using a lot of different levers to impact sentiment. To
send that message, absolutely. And Saudi is very prepared to do things voluntarily for the time being as well. It's the only one really that has the leeway to do that anyway. Mehmet, back to you. Let's talk a bit about Erdogan now. Has he settled in? Has he settled back in to his position comfortably? And what is the outlook? He's made a few ministerial changes on the economic front, sending that message that I'm going to correct everything. What's the sentiment now, a month or so into his re-election in Turkey?
Well, Erdogan really settled in very quickly, since he has been, of course, in governance more than 20 years. He knows his business well, and he started immediately with a new cabinet, which has been actually received quite positively by all the political circles. So this is a very pragmatic, non-confrontational, and business-like cabinet. And the foreign minister is the former chief of the Turkish intelligence. Mehmet Şimşek came to head the economy, and he's a very respected former economy minister. Also, he was working as a consultant to many financial and economic groups in the Gulf and in London and US. So he's respected. We have a new governor of the central bank, a lady who came from the US. And therefore, I think the team is in place so long as Erdogan doesn't interfere too much. As you know, he doesn't like interest rates going up. And the team, I think, can do a good job, it looks. And so we have to wait and see. There is going to be a phased approach to economic recovery and changes. It's not going to happen overnight. So we are expecting the new interest rates and the currency, how it's going to be handled. But my concern is that since there's very serious finance problems, shortage, there's a foreign debt to be rescheduled soon, and current account deficit is booming, around $60 billion. And how are you going to finance all these energy projects? We have mega projects, as you know, in the Black Sea for the gas project. It's going ahead still. And there is new discovery of oil in Gabar near the Iraqi border. And of course, Turkey is heavily dependent on imports of natural gas at 98%, oil almost 95%. Therefore, the local production will be going up. I think more importantly, geopolitical relations, how Turkey is going to balance, its closer ties with Putin, Xi Jinping, Iran, because we had a meeting in Astana yesterday between Russia, Turkey, Iran, and Syria about the future of Syria. There is a roadmap already, I think, discussed, but not agreed yet on how to improve Turkish-Syrian relations, because Syrian precondition is that Turkish troops should be withdrawn from there. But I believe that a solution will be found there sooner or later. So that Turkey is normalizing its relations, but how it's going to happen with the US and EU is another question, because it's troublesome. But Turkey is expecting most of the economic support, investment, trade, technology, what you have, finance, from EU and US rather than the East. And I think Erdogan is handling it well. And he's also preparing now, quicker than the opposition, how he's going to handle the local elections coming up in March 2024. And he wants to get back Ankara and Istanbul, which is the heavyweights in Turkish local politics. And therefore, I think it's going well. If there is no disruption, geopolitically, economically, energy-wise, it's well balanced. But Turkey needs quickly massive amounts of fresh capital flowing into the economy, wherever it might come from, the Gulf, US, China, Russia. But it's going to be a very balanced and stable policy. Now we can see ahead of us 5 years. Of course, if Erdogan's health doesn't deteriorate and create another crisis, things seem to be going well. On China, I want to add another thing. Don't forget that China has huge capacity for storage. As a caution, because if we expect Chinese demand will go up towards the end of the year, China is preparing for this, buying and buying and buying more than it needs and storing it for the rainy days.
Well, thank you, Mehmet, for that. Well, Noor, let's go to you on that. I mean, where is its storage capacity as far as you can tell at the moment? There was talk a few weeks ago that it was almost at limit because it's had this buying spree at the current prices. Where any indication there of this? It has a huge capacity, but it's been filling it up pretty ambitious.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I actually don't have a number on what the SPR in China is. I mean, I think that yes, they have been buying over the last few months, but I don't actually have a number on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I mean, nobody has the official numbers. I suppose the indications are what it's taking in. I suppose we have to still look at the import numbers. Rafiq, just to go to you, let's look at that survey question. There we go. We've been touching on that today with the world awash with oil at the moment. And the outlook for the global economy, people are saying, well, it hasn't happened yet. So this shallow recession is coming. There's no chance that prices will exceed $80 in the second half, the 70 to 80 range. For various reasons. Demand could be one of them, but also OPEC intervention and Chinese action could also be influencing that. So agree or disagree? Do you think we'll see above 80? Only a few months ago, some banks were saying $100. They've revised those since then. Rafiq, just to go to you a bit on the East Med, where you are in Cyprus, any update there on the gas sort of action, if you like, discoveries, further investment, any sort of traction there that is expected going forward?
Yeah, well, the new Cypriot government has reached out and it looks like, and I welcome this, they're abandoning this idea of the pipeline from the East Med and to Greece via Cyprus, which never really made sense, to be honest. But I mean, it was a big money pit. We've got, I can't remember exactly, but they're very deep depths of water, and this would have been substantial expensive project. And now they're looking at a pipeline from Israeli fields and Cypriot fields to Cyprus. This has been around for a bit. Personally, I think the key thing here is the trajectory of Egyptian demand. You know, if Egyptian demand and its own production if its own production starts to dip or doesn't rise, and Egyptian demand continues its trajectory, there won't be that much room for increasing exports, to be honest. You know, it's all going to be sucked in internally, so it'll need another Zohr-like discovery. Now we are seeing, hopefully this year, some of these big key offshore wells should be drilled towards the end of this year by the majors, and then we'll know. So it's the East Med is always one step away from taking off or some form of decision. I think we still need to wait certainly a few months before we'll get any sort of firmer clarity on that. I have a sense that maybe the Cypriots have missed the boat in terms of having their own LNG project. You know, they discovered that this gas, when was it, 12 years ago? Really, you know, if they were going to do it, they should have done it a bit earlier.
The speed at which the Mediterranean runs.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rafi. Noor Azleen, just to go to you on again, sort of demand outlook picture, putting China aside, you know, the Fed policy, the rates policy, and how that's fed into a stronger dollar. And of course, the debt situation. We have the leaders of the world gathering in France. Macron seems to be getting China and Saudi to attend, but not the US, taking the place perhaps. And they're all, you know, global debt is one of the things they're discussing amongst geopolitics. But how much is that impacting other peripheral demand for those countries that are really, you know, under a lot of stress because of their dollar-denominated debt?
Yeah, good question. I mean, okay, look, in terms of the global oil demand growth, I think that the one thing that a lot of consultants have is like, it's very different. I mean, the IEA, the OPEC, everyone's got their own number. I can tell you that the Argus Consulting team's view is that global oil demand will go about 1.7 million barrels per day. So I think we're somewhere in the middle, and I think we're a lot lower than what the IEA and possibly what OPEC has said. Yes. So the thing is that I guess with the interest rate hikes potentially with Fed Chairman Powell just indicating that this is not the end, there is a pause. I think that it could potentially have impact on the countries that are already struggling. I mean, South Asia, put away India, but Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I mean, to give you an example, Sri Lanka and Pakistan have started to turn to Russian crude. Pakistan just unloaded a cargo of Russian crude, and a lot of it is because I guess they're really struggling in terms of the debt. So I think that with the interest rates just continue to rise, it's going to be tough for a lot of the smaller countries that are already struggling. Now, how much of an impact, how big of an impact that would have on demand, we'd have to wait and see, I think, on what happens over the next few months. It's a little bit too unclear at this point.
And of course, I mean, Pakistan resisted taking Russian crude for months because it's trying to negotiate its IMF deal, and of course, taking Russian crude is contrary to its US relationship. Let's say it'd be frowned on a little bit on that. Mehmet, just back to you. We have a minute left. Give us your geopolitical sort of crystal ball view on what's happening in France now. I saw you nodding there in terms of Macron. You know, we had the leader of Saudi Arabia there earlier this week. We've got the Chinese premier there as well, in the context of the US having just visited China as well. The US really seems to be losing its footing, doesn't it, as in terms of leading these conversations?
Well, I think Macron is trying to fill a gap, because right now, I mean, the positions in EU and US are very, very strong vis-a-vis China and also Russia. So there is a need for someone to pick up the pieces. And Turkey actually was doing it to a certain extent, but it's not a member of EU. and talking to Putin and Macron and Scholz and US and UK. But on the EU side, there is not a very strong foreign policy czar. And Macron wants to be so. It has serious problems domestically, as we all know. So he wants to show off in the international arena and also to sell more French arms and technology, increase exports and import investments. Therefore, he's trying to create a new role for himself. How successful he's going to be? So far, track record is not a very good one, but we have to see and assess what's going to happen. But I want to say one word about EastMed, if I may, to follow up what Refik said. Yes, I think Cyprus missed the boat for LNG. There are so many pipeline projects. I think this EastMed pipeline idea already died a long time ago. It's not feasible politically, economically. And I think there is a renewed effort to perhaps transform EastMed Gazprom, which excludes some of the players, including the major player Turkey, and moving away from only natural gas focus, perhaps, renewables, efficiency, climate change, finance, risk, all these issues perhaps might come under a new umbrella, a new transformed perhaps EastMed Natural Gas Forum. And the idea that we also discuss in Germany and France and US, and the EU is also looking at it favorably, and some of the regional countries, whether Turkey could be included in the new structure, which could be perhaps renamed as EastMed Energy Community. So there are different ideas floating to reduce tension and increase cooperation in EastMed, so that it's going to be win-win for all the parties.
Okay, I think we're going to end on that positive note because we don't have a lot of those these days. Mehmet, thank you so much for joining us. Refik Atta and Nuruddin Ahmed, thank you so much everyone for joining us, and have a good weekend ahead until we see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah.
All the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye.